With us, we have Professor Grace Bullaro. She was with us last interview, and now we are continuing with the second part of the interview with the cinema of Roberto Benigni. Professor Bullaro teaches literature, philosophy, and film at Lehman College, among other subjects. She has published many articles, and last year she published 2 books, one on Lina Werth-Müller and the other one on Roberto Benigni. Today's discussion is going to be on her book, which is Beyond the Life is Beautiful by Roberto Benigni. So, welcome back again, and thanks again. Since we are talking about film, and you teach apparently film, can you tell us a little about the Italian film today? Anything about it? Because I don't hear much of the Italian film.
Oh, actually, today's Italian cinema is really vibrant, really exciting. But some people will say that it's a different kind of Italian cinema because there are, given the demographic changes in the Italian population with the influx of immigrants from basically all over the world, a lot of the filmmakers today are not native-born Italians, or perhaps they are first or second generation. And Italy is in the process of having, similar to America, of having to redefine what is an Italian. So Italian cinema today in Italy, there is a very strong presence of foreign immigrants.
For the last 7 years, there is a Italian film festival at Lincoln Center. In fact, today is the last day, and they call it a new Italian cinema. What do they mean? Do they mean to break away from the traditional, let's say, representation that Lina Werth-Müller, Roberto Benigni, and Fellini, for example, are they moving away, a new experience, but has to do with the immigration, or what?
I think that cinema today in Italy, if it's a new cinema, because essentially it's a new Italy, the topics that are of interest today in Italy are very different. I mean, think of the commedia all'italiana of the 1960s and early 70s, very light, very frothy. But today, the world is a lot more serious, and there are serious problems not only in Italy, but there are problems with people moving all over the world, and as cultures become more multicultural, then there are very serious issues that need to be addressed. The new Italian cinema does that.
For a non-Italian, let's say, after Roberto Benigni, Life is Beautiful, basically, cannot say that there is an Italian film that is dominant, a personality such as Roberto Benigni, for example.
In Italy or?
No, here in the U.S.
Right, I would have to agree with you.
Yeah, so.
I would have to agree with you. I cannot think of a major success.
Well, the book here that you have, this is one of your last books, of the 2 books that you published the last year, is a collection of essays. Obviously, you tried to put together all the essays, pros and cons about the film and Benigni himself. You also made an introduction, and you presented an essay. Essay, of course, it's very interesting, and I thought maybe we could discuss a little about your essay. But what is the film about? I'm sure the American public has seen the film and will know immediately Life is Beautiful, and also Benigni, who was an actor, and he's also the film director. What is this?
Also the co-writer with Cerami, Vincenzo Cerami.
What is the story about? Briefly.
It's a story of a Tuscan young man who meets and marries Dora, a woman who is about to marry a fascist.
This is during the fascist era.
It takes place in the mid-30s, starting in the mid-30s, perhaps 1938, when the anti-Semitic laws were promulgated in Italy. And in the first half of the film, they marry, they have a little boy. Every life is beautiful. But in the second, at the end of this first half, we see that things are not so beautiful anymore, and he gets shipped to a concentration camp. She chooses to go along with him. The wife chooses to go along with him, even though she is not Jewish. The second half of the film takes place in the concentration camp. He has his 5-year-old son with him, and he decides that he needs to save the child's life. He's going to make a game he's going to fictionalize their presence in the concentration camp. He turns it into a game in order to keep him quiet, compliant, and hidden during the day. He tells him that if he does that, he will, in the end, win the game and therefore win a ride in a real-life tank. He hides the boy throughout the film, and in the end he himself is killed, but the boy does win the ride in the tank. So there is a sort of happy ending, the way that it is framed.
Happy, which is the ending of a comedy.
Right.
In fact, you named the book The Comedy and Tragedy.
Right.
So there's a tragedy and there is a comedy. Right. What do the critics say with regard to the tragedy and the comedy, this putting together of these two extreme modes?
As a general strategy, in cinema or in the theater or in any of the arts, it is not unusual. But in this film, it created a huge controversy.
Why is it unusual? If something is tragic, and then somebody, an artist, uses it to create a comedy, something which has a happy ending, why is this aspect here difficult or not the same?
You mean in this film? Because basically there are certain topics that a lot of people, both the public and the critics, believe are off limits to comedy. And the Holocaust is one of them.
Holocaust is.
And to turn the Holocaust into a comedy, no matter how serious a comedy, but to turn it into a comedy is hugely offensive to a lot of people. And so that was one of the problems.
There are people who praised it also,
Absolutely.
Right?
In fact, it was critically acclaimed, and the public loved it, but there were also many who didn't.
The main critic, I think, is that he uses a historic fact and distorts it in order to achieve his artistic end.
Right.
But isn't that what every artist does? Every artist does.
Well, not necessarily.
If you write a novel, even a historic novel.
Well, you fictionalize it, sure.
You fictionalize. How accurate what is the obligation of an artist to replicate history 100%, for example? He's not a historian.
Right, absolutely not.
So where is the fault of Benigni, who takes a very serious, ugly period of history, and he says, I'm going to create a comedy out of this?
Right. He does not have the obligation to be historically accurate. But that does not mean that it isn't seen as a problem that he has distorted the experience of the concentration camp. The criticism went something like this. By prettifying or sanitizing the concentration camp, turning it into what is obviously a stage set, by hiding the brutality, the violence, the sheer horror of it, you mislead the public. You also give a lot of strength to the denialists. He says at the very beginning,
this is a fable.
Well,
this is a fable.
Okay, this is a fable.
This is not history.
And he, behind the scenes, that is actually in the film. And Benigni has also said, I didn't want to make a historically accurate film. I wanted to make a story. I wanted to tell the story of a father's love for his child. But unfortunately, by picking the Holocaust, you expose yourself to criticism of historical revisionism, of being a denialist, and all sorts of problems.
Could also be said that he, in fact, by revisiting the Holocaust, is in fact revitalizing it, give it a new image or a new possibility of viewing the event. In fact, in Italy, this film sort of revived the subject that the Italians had just about forgotten. And is that true? I think
not so much
it
that
shows
revived
in your
it.
book anyway.
Right,
it comes up.
It's not so much that it revived the subject. It's just that the whole topic of the Holocaust and acknowledging Italian responsibility in the Holocaust is a relatively new topic in Italy. Until very recently, it was just a black hole in history. So yes, this film, in a perverse kind of way, and I say perverse because it was ironic, it was not the intended outcome, in some way, by creating a controversy and people saying, no, the concentration camps were not like that. No, this is historically inaccurate. No, you messed this up, you messed that up. It wasn't like that. How dare you? By creating that controversy, he has brought the Holocaust once again to the forefront.
Well, I have also the opinion that it is true when a film is seen and the public does not realize if it is specifically history or fiction, that you can learn things that you think are accurate, especially the young people. But he says in the very beginning, you know, I have seen many films in which I was offended by saying the Roman history, for example, they
it just wasn't like that, right?
Always they show the Romans as brute people who fight in the Colosseum, and that's it. That's 2,000 years of history right there in that brutality. But at the same time, the artist should be free to present a different aspect. The fact that Benigni does not show the brutality in its totality of that concentration camp isn't the fact that who is actually presenting the story is the son, who at 5 years old did not see all the horrors of the camp. See, it's not the father who's telling the story, but it's the son who says at the end, this is what my father gave to me as a gift for shielding me from these horrific events. Your conclusion, in fact, is what is your conclusion in the in your paper? First of all, you question what is the difference between a fable with a fairy tale.
Right.
Obviously, they are not the same. But if you were to ask me right then and there, I don't know what the exact difference is.
Right.
To me, both are fairy tales. They are stories. They are fiction. I think maybe the word fiction would be best to say.
But he didn't say fiction.
He says it's a fairy.
Una favola.
Una favola, or fabula. That is fiction to our understanding. But I think you and the critics have shown that there is a difference into it.
Well, because both fable and fairy tale, these are two genres of literature that have follow specific conventions.
But to the layman, they don't know the difference. They only know that it is a fable. It's not. It's not true.
Right.
So that is. Then there's another aspect which.
But the critics are not the general public. Don't forget.
Of course not.
While the general public goes into the theater and says, "Oh, fairy tale, fable. What's the difference? Oh, the Holocaust. Oh, that wasn't so bad."
The people in America.
We have a job to heighten.
Of course. But the people in America, how did they receive generally this film?
Generally, the public loved it because. Well, I'm guessing. My speculation is that the public is there to be entertained, doesn't really want the full horror, and they were pretty happy with it. It was an upbeat movie, but the critics didn't have the same.
Your second objection, which I think it's important to say, maybe you can reiterate now about the psychological effect to the child.
Right.
What is the father doing to safeguard the son's innocence, but what does the critic or you yourself say about that? Well,
I wasn't really presenting my own ideas in this, in the sense that these are not. I base my paper on a lot of research that I did in child psychology. I read, through child psychologists or developmental specialists. One of the central questions in children's literature, all children's literature, is whether children should be exposed to violence, to the ugliness of life, in order to kind of immunize them to it, so that they learn how to cope with it. They learn that life is not just one big party. Or is it better
to go into a well-adjusted adult?
Right, exactly. Or is it better to protect them from the brutal realities of life? I believe that a lot of my research, convinced me that it is children need to understand the facts in order to understand the true nature of life, in order to learn coping strategies for facing the obstacles.
But so your conclusion is basically
that he didn't do him any favors by protecting him from the truth.
It was by not exposing his son to the brutality of the situation,
Right.
the reality. In effect, he's damaging his psychological development.
Right. One of the critics, one of the child psychologists that I read, in fact suggested that at some later time, that child might just as well not have gone through that experience because nothing registered.
Do the critics take into consideration the age? The age of the boy is 5 years.
Right.
The actual actor is also 5 years.
Giorgio Cantarini.
So even aside from the fictitious character, also the child himself, exposing this
Yes.
child 5 years old. But I think in general, do the critics take into consideration the young age? I mean, 5 years old, how can you expose to, how much brutality can you do it? Obviously, you can adjust giving brutality when he's 10, 15, and so forth. But at 5 years old, isn't that justifiable what Benigni does by protecting?
Well, one of the major criticisms was that the whole premise was just like totally implausible. That you could not keep a 5-year-old child in those conditions and keep him quiet, keep him hidden, and all that. So that is already a major deceit that the director is practicing on the public.
I saw the movies,
Yeah.
both of them,
Yeah.
and I would like to propose.
Both of them? Which?
No, the same.
The same. Okay.
Life is beautiful. And in considering and reading your book, I came up with a slightly different opinion of what happened there. There is not so much the innocence of the child that the father is trying to save, but rather the movie director is trying to present a different idea. The idea would be the triumph of the Jewish people over the evil events of fascism and Nazism.
Well, perhaps.
I would like to present this
Yeah.
to you so that you
Right.
can see how good or bad the presentation is. Maybe we can go to the clips that we have. This is the two ending of the film is divided in two parts, basically.
Right.
So I'll present the ending of the first part.
Grazie! Musica maestro! Auguri! Grazie! Prego, principessa.
Lei?
Veloce, principessa.
Questa è la mia storia. Questo è il sacrificio che mio padre ha fatto. Questo è stato il suo regalo per me.
Abbiamo vinto!
Sì, abbiamo vinto! Gesù!
1000 punti da schiantare e da ridere! Primi si ritorna a casa col carro armato! Abbiamo vinto!
This is a beautiful ending. If you notice, the film is being divided in two sections. One is a criticism against the fascist in Italy.
Right.
And there we see is that this Benigni goes, the main character goes into the Grand Hotel, which represents the whole setup of the fascism. And he steals away the bride of this fascist official. And he goes out, by the way, the horse has been determined to be
A Jewish horse.
the Jewish horse. So to me, that is a happy ending, as the comedy should, but also it indicates the triumph of the Jewish people against fascism. Here he goes into the fascist ambient or place, and he takes away the bride with the Jewish horse. And there's, I think, it's a happy ending.
The princess, in fact.
They call it princess because they say it's a fairy tale. But anyway, the second part ends up in the same identical thing, is that the child comes out, sees the military tank, and he says it's true what his father was telling him. But when he sees his mother, he screams and says, abbiamo vinto, we won. I submit to you that at that point he does not refer to the father and the son that won the game of the 1,000 point with the military tank, but rather as a people, the Jewish people have now won also over the evil of Nazism, and he says, we won. And in fact, the mother and the child do not mention the father at all.
Right.
It is not the specific death that in that moment is represented. It's nothing to do with the innocence, but has to do rather, again, with the happy ending of the Jewish people winning over the evil events of the period. So I see it as a simile, the two running together and ending up as a comedy. The tragedy is secondary to the. So what do you think about this? Is it possible to interpret this as?
Well, you know, a work of art, this is a work of art. I don't necessarily mean that a work of art in the sense that it is absolutely supreme as a work of art, quality-wise, but it is a work of art, and it is a reasonably profound movie. And I think that given that, from a point of departure, there are many interpretations of it. I think there's a little bit of a problem if you want to, you know, identify the boy Joshua with being Jewish because his mother is not Jewish. And in the Jewish religion, it is the mother's identity.
But at that point, we are in a concentration camp, and the father is Jewish, and he is Jewish. So when he says, abbiamo vinto, we won, is the Jewish people who won over this.
I would take it, personally, I mean, that is not a possibility, but personally, I take it as good having triumphed over evil. We, meaning the good of the world. We have defeated more, because I would tend to go with a larger category to make it symmetrical. You know, evil, good.
But I think the part one and part two run parallel and in a similar way. So if that is seen that way, then the idea of innocence or even evil has nothing to do with it. It's just that the comedy ends in a happy event. The background is obviously ugly, and because the child is the one who remembers the story. So I think Benigni is forgivable that did not show all the horror, because it's not his part. Any horror he would have shown.
And yet you know that he has said that he made a concerted effort to make sure,
that it
he
was-
had a consultant from the Centro degli Studi Ebraici in Milan. He had Pezzetti on the set to make sure that everything was historically accurate.
Yeah.
I don't know how he could have thought that this was coming out historically accurate, yet he did want to ensure
Well, that
historical
shows.
accuracy.
By the way, is Benigni Jewish or not? Because
Not
I've
that I
seen
know
in
of.
your book is controversial.
Yeah,
Some people have said he's Jewish.
As far as I know, he is not Jewish.
Ah.
As far as I mean, if it turns out that he's
What is
Jewish,
it?
then you know he has hidden this.
Wertmüller and Benigni, in a sense, criticized society just as, in a way that are both representative of their periods, but also,
Right.
so the two,
Well,
I think,
Benigni is a thorn in the side of everybody of Italian establishment,
Politics.
criticizing Berlusconi, criticizing
The mafia.
political structure, criticizing basically everybody. He is very, very,
yeah. Okay, this is why it's another big personality,
Yeah.
and I'm glad that we had this conversation because we have come to the end of it.
Okay.
And I say goodbye now, and I hope to see you next time when we will present another Italian-American writer. Thank you very much.